Hey guys, we are continuing on in our world religion series. This Sunday, we're going to be talking about Jehovah's Witnesses. And there's some semi complicated things going on in discussion groups that you guys will go through. So hopefully, this video can help you out. I'll start off just with asking if there are any comments or questions or confusion or anything that needs to be clarified from our large group discussion. I'm just going to go through some background, some similarities that they have with Protestant Christianity, and some of the major differences that they have, which has kind of been our pattern throughout this series. The second question you'll ask is what verses, ask students, can they think of any verses that push against the annihilationist view that Jehovah's Witnesses have? This is something we'll talk about in our large group. They teach annihilationism, which means there's no hell, or at least there's no eternal suffering for people. When non-believers die, they are annihilated, or they simply cease to exist consciously. So there's no eternal conscious torment for those who don't believe. They're just annihilated, which is clearly contrary to what Scripture and Christ himself says over and over again. There's tons of verses we could look at here. Hopefully our students can think of some in their heads, so see what they can bring out themselves. And then there's a couple here that I would like for you to go ahead and read through. Again, as we go through this series, we're learning about other religions, but we're also firming up what we believe, and so we want to support what we claim to believe with Scripture. So go through those passages really quick. The next thing you're going to do is take a look at Revelation 7, which is a complicated passage, but this is a key passage for Jehovah's Witnesses. They believe the 144,000 people mentioned in Revelation 7 are a special class of saved people that will rule with God forever in heaven, and everybody else that's saved will live on the recreated earth. So they'll live without sin, they'll live without pain, but there's one group of 144,000 people in heaven, and then the rest of people live on earth. The rest of believing people live on earth in eternity. So this is a pretty important passage that they build a major doctrine on, and so we want to take a brief look at it. And you don't have to perfectly explain this passage. It's a semi-complex passage, but it's not super complex to see that the Jehovah's Witness interpretation is lacking. It doesn't really make sense. So I would go and read maybe verses 1 through 9. The gist of the passage is that God is sealing 144,000 people for himself, and then it lists off 12,000 from each of the 12 tribes of Israel in the first 8 verses. And then verse 9 is maybe a more familiar verse to us, where John says he looks and he sees a multitude that can't be counted, it can't be numbered, from every tribe and every nation and every language, worshiping God before the throne. And so those are the first 9 verses, and there's a couple of things that we can just point to immediately that would show us the way that Jehovah's Witnesses are interpreting this can't be correct. The first is that there's kind of 2 major ways that Protestant Christians will interpret this passage. One is to take a really literal view, that literally God is going to save 12,000 people from each of the tribes of Israel before the end of the earth, kind of during the tribulation period. And so you interpret those literally. The other way is to interpret it symbolically. Israel is not only the nation of Israel, it's true Israel, all of the children of Abraham by faith. And 144,000 is just meant to be a really large number. So this is actually all of the redeemed people throughout all of history. Both of these are symbolic. Israel is symbolic. The 12,000 from each tribe is symbolic. So those are kind of the 2 ways a lot of Protestants will interpret this passage. You either take both of them literally, it's literal Israel and it's a literal 12,000 from each tribe, or Israel is symbolic and it's the numbers are symbolism, which is common in the book of Revelation, and they're just supposed to mean a great multitude. Jehovah's Witnesses, though, they take Israel symbolically, because obviously they don't think these 144,000 are all Jews, but they take the number literally, which is strange. If one is symbolic, they're probably both going to be symbolic. If one is literal, they're probably both going to be literal, but Jehovah's Witnesses kind of pick and choose which one they want to be symbolic and which one they want to be literal. Easier explanation is the next verse, Revelation 7:9, talks about a great multitude worshiping before the throne of God from every tribe and every nation. It says this multitude can't be numbered, so obviously it's more than 144,000. It can't possibly be counted. And so that would nod towards a more symbolic understanding that a lot of Christians lean towards, but it certainly excludes you saying only 144,000 people are going to be in this saved class, because some Jehovah's Witnesses will read Revelation 7:9 and they'll say that's the great multitude on earth. All the other people aside from the 144,000, they get to dwell on the earth, and yet in Revelation 7, that great multitude is worshiping before God in heaven. And so that's an immediate kind of contradiction to their doctrine. So that's just a cursory look at Revelation 7 to kind of have an understanding. If we're going to get into a discussion with Jehovah's Witnesses, this is a passage that might come up. It's one that we want to be somewhat familiar with, even though we might not perfectly understand every nuance of it. Revelation is a complicated book. Obviously, we want to understand enough to know why we would disagree strongly with the way that Jehovah's Witnesses interpret that passage. Next, question 4 is an opinion to the students. What do they think would be the most important things to kind of focus on in an evangelistic conversation with a Jehovah's Witness? I've got some suggestions here. They can probably pull from the major differences that we talk about in our large group study. And then there's one activity I want you guys to go through with them that's highlighted in yellow at the bottom. And I'll also provide a link to this article that kind of explains this illustration. It's on John 1, verse 3. Jehovah's Witnesses deny the Trinity, so they deny that Jesus is fully God. They believe he's a lesser God, that God the Father created Jesus, and so Jesus is important. He's a God, but he's not on the same level as Jehovah, as God himself. And Jehovah's Witnesses use the Bible as their source of authority, but they have a specific translation that changes certain phrases and words around to better fit their doctrine and their theology. One of the main examples is John 1:1, where it says the Word was God. They say instead the Word was a God. That's a significant change. And so some people, my Greek professor in college said he loves when Jehovah's Witnesses come and knock on his door. He pulls out his Greek New Testament and he shows them how that translation there's no justification for translating it that way. But odds are a lot of the Jehovah's Witnesses we might come in contact with are not going to know Greek super well, and neither do our students. And so this is one where you don't have to know Greek. You don't have to focus on John 1:1. You just have to shift down 2 verses to John 1:3, where the translations between the Bible we would use and the New World's translation that Jehovah's Witnesses use are very similar. Our translation says, the ESV says, all things were made through him, and without him was not anything made that was made. And they have a very similar translation of that verse. And so you can go to John 1:3 and I'll walk through a little illustration. This article, again, explains it well, but essentially you draw a box on a piece of paper, and I would have students do this on the back of their note sheet. You divide the box in 2, and this is everything that exists. Everything that exists is inside of this box, and it falls into one of 2 categories. Either it was created on the right side, or it was not created. So either it came into being or it did not come into being. Those are kind of the two options, and those are the only two options. Everything that exists either came into being or did not come into being. Either it was created or it wasn't created. And if you go to John 1:3, it says that through Christ, through Jesus, nothing was made that was made. And the Jehovah's Witness translation is actually even more explicit. I think it says, not a single thing that was made was made. And so if Jesus, through Christ, everything in the right side of that box was created through Jesus, everything that was created through Jesus, then Jesus himself can't fall into the right side of the box. Otherwise, he would have had to create himself, which means Jesus has to fall into the left side of the box, those things that were not created. Anyways, that's a quick explanation, but go read that article, and it kind of walks it through step by step together, which is how I would do that with our students. And that's a simple conversation anybody can have with a Jehovah's Witness, just to challenge their beliefs about whether or not Jesus is God, whether he was created or not. And it's can be done from our Bible or the translation that they use. And so that's an activity I would definitely go through with students. And then if you have time, this last question, other things besides kind of the message, the gospel that we want to present to Jehovah's Witnesses, what are some other things that might be helpful for us to do? One would be to give them books, give them literature. We'll talk about this in our main time together as a group. They study heavily. The Watchtower is the publishing arm of Jehovah's Witnesses, and it cranks out a ton of material that they take in and study. And so if they love literature, a great thing to do would be to give them some true Protestant Christian literature to read. There are tracts that are written specifically for Jehovah's Witnesses, challenging some of the differences that they have. Theology books would be a good thing to go through. You can offer to swap literature. If they give us something, we'll give them something, and then maybe you can come back some other time and we can discuss what you read and what I read. That's a great way to interact with Jehovah's Witnesses. And lastly, another really important thing is to show them some love. When they come and knock on your door specifically, they're out doing door-to-door ministry. They're coming into contact with people that don't care about them, that don't like them, that are rude to them, that are harsh to them, that shut the door in their face. And we want to be different. We want to be hospitable. Invite them in, make them a cup of coffee, make them a drink. Give them some food if they want it, welcome them into your home. We have to actually care for these people in order for our presentation of the gospel to get through. We don't just invite them into our home to embarrass them and show them that they're dumb for what they believe. We want them to come to a saving knowledge of Christ. And so in order to do that, we should actually love them, and we should demonstrate that love with acts of service and hospitality towards them. All right, that's what you guys got for this week. It's a lot to cover. You may not get to every question, but I'll see you guys on Sunday.